Hi Nature Explorers, this is the second of 3 videos about invertebrates, and in this video we're going to learn all about bees. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the bee species that live in the UK and also show you what you can do in your garden to help the bees. And let's start off by looking at honeybees. So this is a honeybee here, and its body is very similar to all other bees in that it's got 2 pairs of wings, so a top wing and a bottom wing on each side. It's got a waist, which makes its abdomen more manoeuvrable for things like stinging and egg laying. And then on the back legs, it's got a set of bristly hairs called a pollen basket where it carries its pollen. Now, honeybees are different to all other bees in the UK in that their colony survives the winter, and that's why bees make honey, so that they've got something to eat through the winter months until the flowers bloom again in the spring and they can go foraging. Here's a video of a honeybee foraging, and I want you to watch very closely and have a look at its face so you can watch its tongue extending into the flowers to gather the nectar.
You can't have the fish on the other side of the window.
One of the most familiar groups of bees is the bumblebee. Now, bumblebees have the same sort of body layout as other bees in that they have the 2 pairs of wings, the waist, the pollen baskets, but they are much bigger and crucially, they're furry. Now, being furry allows them to forage in colder temperatures, and this gives them an advantage over other bees because they're able to get out foraging earlier before the other bees can reach the flowers. Now you can tell different species of bumblebees apart by the stripes on their body. Now I won't go into this now because there's quite a few species of bumblebees, but you can look that up later. Here's a video of a bumblebee foraging, and I want you to look very carefully at the bumblebee's back legs where you can see it's got full pollen baskets filled with orange pollen. There's lots of different species of bumblebees in the UK, but they all follow this pattern through the year. So this is their yearly cycle. So first off, in the springtime, you'll notice that there's often big bees flying around close to the ground and doing quite odd things for bees, so crawling into dark holes and crawling about on the grass and not going to flowers. Well, these are the queen bumblebees that have emerged from hibernation and are looking for somewhere to nest. And the reason they're crawling into dark places is because bumblebees like to nest either on the surface of the ground or in old vole or mouse holes. Now, once they've found somewhere nice to nest, the queen bumblebee will gather together pollen and nectar to sustain herself while she lays eggs and broods those eggs until they hatch. And the nice thing is that bumblebees actually sit on their eggs and keep them warm just like birds do. And then once the workers have hatched, they then go out and forage flowers and find pollen and nectar. And then that carries on for a few weeks, and then towards the end of the summer, the queen starts to produce other bees that could become queens, and males as well. And the colony gradually peters out and the worker bees die, and the queens and the males mate. And then once the queens have mated, the queens then hibernate in a north-facing bank somewhere that's going to stay nice and cool all the way through the winter until the springtime again. And then they go out and they find a nest, and the cycle continues. Now we know about the bumblebee life cycle, let's think about the different ways we can help them through that life cycle. Now, one of the things we can do is by planting things in our gardens that help the bees. So let's think about the queens emerging early in the spring. They're going to be really hungry because they've been hibernating all winter. So we need to think about things that are an early source of pollen and nectar. Now, trees and shrubs in the garden are a really good way of doing that because they often flower early. So in our garden, we've got a few fruit trees, and I find it's things like plums and cherries that tend to flower first. So they're good plants to have. Other good plants are hedging plants that flower. So this is a hawthorn, and you can see it's covered in lovely flowers now. And then another good plant to have is also a rowan tree. And the reason that hawthorns and rowans are also good is that they produce berries later in the year. So they've got a double benefit of helping the bees in the springtime and the birds in the autumn. And something else that I wanted to show you here, which is something that we can do with our hedges and our borders, is to have long tussocky grass all around the edges. Because if you remember, in the bee's life cycle, they need somewhere to nest, and that is often just on the surface of the ground in tussocks of grass or in old vole and mouse holes. And this habitat is perfect for voles and perfect to create those protective tussocks for the queen bees to nest in. The last group of bees I wanted to talk to you about is solitary bees. Now, solitary bees don't form colonies. Every female solitary bee is a queen, and she lays her own eggs and looks after them. Now, you might have seen lots of little holes in the ground, and those are solitary bee nests. Each of those holes that you might see in your lawn or in the flower bed will have a solitary bee inside it. Now, solitary bees also nest in holes under bark or in rotting wood as well. And I'm going to show you later how to make a bee hotel, which will hopefully attract lots of solitary bees to it. If you want to help solitary bees in your garden, one thing that you can do is to create places for them to nest. Now, for the bees that dig into the soil, this is really easy. All you need to do is leave some bare soil in a really sunny spot, and they will find it in the springtime. For the other bees that like to nest on rotting wood or in holes in bricks, you can get more creative. Now, this is something that we've created. This is our solitary bee nest hotel. Now, I've got a little bit of footage of bees already using it. We only built it in early April of this year, and there's already residents, so I'm really excited about that. So what you need to do is create yourself a frame which will be able to stand all weathers. So I've used some old flooring here which I've screwed together to make it into a box, but you can use whatever you've got. You could maybe use an old drawer or whatever boxes you've got lying around at home. And what you do is you pack it with places to nest. Now, solitary bees really like to nest in maybe garden canes or hollow plant material. And what we've done here is we've chosen lots of old logs, so you need to use kind of untreated timber, and we've drilled lots of different sized holes in these logs, because solitary bees, as I said, there's so many different species. Some of them are kind of normal honeybee sized, but some of them are tiny as well. And if the holes are a little bit too big, it doesn't matter so much because the bees will pack them in and seal them up. So yeah, so you fill your frame with as many different types of nesting material as you can find, and you leave it in a nice sunny spot, and hopefully the bees will find it. Now, a lot of people recommend clearing it out every autumn, and if it's one that's easily disassemblable, then I recommend that you do that too. But if it's just drilled holes like this, then it's fine to leave it. Wildflowers are a great thing to have in your garden, because the wildflowers that we have in the UK have grown alongside our bees for years and years and years, and so the different shapes and sizes of flowers suit the different shapes and sizes of bee. Now, this is our wildflower bed. There's not much to see here at the moment. There's red campion in flower, and that's one of the first things to flower in my wildflower bed, and that's more for kind of the queens that emerge in the springtime or just the start of the bumblebee colonies. But the other plants that I've got are things like knapweed, which is a great wildflower to have in your garden because it's really bomb-proof, and the flowers are really dense clusters of flowers with lots of nectar and pollen for the bees, so they love that. I've got scabious, which flowers late into the summer, so the new queens for next year who are feeding up for hibernation can forage on the scabious. And also there's oxeye daisies as well, which are just really, really good cheery wildflowers to have in your garden, so I recommend those too. Another great thing you can do in your garden for bees is to plant lots of herbs. Now, herbs are great because they tend to have lots of dense flowers providing lots of pollen and nectar. Now, this is a big rosemary bush in our front garden, and it begins to flower really early in the year, maybe February time, and it's great for providing pollen and nectar for emerging queens. So really recommend that if you can do, then plant a rosemary bush or chives or lavender. They're really popular for bees too. Another group of plants that can be good for bees are cultivated plants. Now often too people tell you just to plant native plants and things like that, but there are cultivated plants that can have a really long flowering season and provide lots of really good nectar. So this is one that I have in my garden called catmint, and it's just started flowering now, so that's the beginning of May, it just starts, and it flowers through most of the summer, and once it gets going it's often covered in bees. So I really recommend, if you've got space for catmint, and that's a good one to have. The one thing I would say is that it does spread a lot though, so you need to keep it contained. The other one that I quite like is pulmonaria or lungwort. Now that flowers really early, you can see that the flowers have finished now, but I often do see bumblebee queens foraging on that early in the season. And then the other one for main to late season flowering is veronica. Now that has lovely long flowers, well, flower heads with lots and lots of little flowers on them, so it produces lots of pollen and lots of nectar for the bees. But if you ever go looking for plants to plant in your garden, then I recommend that you go to the garden centre on a sunny day and just stand and watch to see which plants the bees are visiting, and those are the plants that you should put in your garden. And if it's not a sunny day, there's a badge supported by the RHS that's called Perfect for Pollinators, and you can look for that logo on the label of the plants, and you can get those plants knowing that they'll be good for bees and other pollinating insects. One of the easiest and cheapest things that you can do for bees in your garden is to allow part of your lawn to flower. Now this is our front lawn, and we try not to cut it all the way through May to allow the flowers that are there to bloom and to provide pollen and nectar for the bees. Now you can see we've got daisies, and that yellow flower in front of us is a cowslip. Now the cowslip is something that I planted, and cowslips are great because they can deal with being mown for most of the year, and in the spring they put up these gorgeous yellow flowers that are great for queen bumblebees emerging from hibernation. Now, other great plants to include in your lawn that can deal with being mown and also provide good nectar sources are things like clovers. Now, bees love clovers, especially red clover. Other plants are things like bird's foot trefoil, that's another good one, and self-heal and ground ivy. They're good plants to plant. But really, I would recommend just choosing a patch of your lawn where it looks like there's lots of different leaves already and just allowing it to grow. In this video I've made lots of suggestions for things that you can do in your garden to help the bees, and this is an activity that might help you realise what you've already got in your garden for bees and help you plan for the future. Now this is something that I did with my 3-year-old, and it's a really rough sketch of the garden, and we talk through what we've got that bees might like. So you can see we've got the rosemary bush and all the herbs that are under the window, and we've got the long grass and the cowslips. We've also got the rowan tree with the early pollen, and Alice decided to draw in a sunshine and a lovely blue sky, and this wavy line through the middle is the breezy breeze. So it's a really nice activity to do, to just get your kids talking about the garden and thinking about what you've got, and it might help you realise what they like to look at in the garden too. So you can have fun with that, and you can do it for bees or any of the other animals that we featured on the Nature Explorers videos.